Warriors, hello and welcome to another week of the Love Your Life show. Today I have a golden episode for you. I have Tony Overbay on the show as a guest. He is a licensed marriage and family therapist, speaker, author, and podcast host. He has been working as a therapist for the past 18 years and has 3 award-winning podcast shows: The Virtual Couch, Waking Up to Narcissism, and the Magnetic Marriage Podcast. Tony has spoken to audiences worldwide on topics ranging from marriage, parenting, navigating a faith crisis, anxiety, depression, ADHD, narcissism, emotional immaturity, and he's here today to speak to us amazing Love Your Life show listeners. This is a great one. And welcome to the Love Your Life show, Tony. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, I am excited, and I love when the behind the scenes stuff is. We've been talking for quite a while before we even hit record, so I already feel I feel a vibe, I feel an energy. So, Susie, I'm excited. This is gonna be fun.
Great. Well, I am so excited too. And I with that vibe, I often ask guests how they end up doing what they're doing and how they got to doing what they're doing. Yet, Tony, you've done over, I think, 400 podcast interviews, and you have your own 3 podcast shows. So I know listeners can find that information, and I will put some links in the show notes with that information. Yet I'm really interested, and I would like to just dive deep in the beginning of what you think you're like. Why do you think that is, that you've been asked 400 times and that you have all this success? Like, what is your gift and your unique sort of angle that is different than others?
Okay. All right. Here comes an exclusive for you and your listeners, being very dramatic, right? But I really think if I'm going to stand in what I like to call in my shows the healthy ego, so not trying to puff myself up, but I found a career that I actually really, really enjoy. And I spent 10 years in computer software before I changed careers. And I didn't even realize how much I did not enjoy computer software when I thought, well, this is what you do. You get a job, you dig in, and then, hopefully your life's okay. And then I changed, and now I've been a therapist for 17, 18 years, and I just love it, everything about it. And so I think I get asked because, to be quite honest, this is what I just eat, breathe, and sleep. And so, I mean, even if you look at the type of things I was talking about on the podcast 3 years ago, I think it's completely different now because I just love taking in data, and I love I have an incredibly busy practice, so I'm practicing literally every day. So when I'm not just out here saying here's a pop psychology myth, and then here's the exclusive. I realized I was already off on a tangent. The exclusive, Susie, is that I feel like I honestly didn't ever go to therapy before I became a therapist. So I didn't really know how I was supposed to act as a therapist. So I feel like I've always just been as very authentic as a therapist, and then even as a podcast host, as a speaker. And so I forgot the part where I'm supposed to be very, very stuffy and very calm. And so I've always just gone on the tangents, and I embrace my ADHD, and I use humor. And so I just am being myself, I guess.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And as you're saying all this, that's what resonates with me. And that's why I'll have the links to your podcast in the show notes too, because one of my favorite episodes, I have no idea which number it was, but it was on your Virtual Couch podcast. It was like an hour long, and you went into, you're really good. You cite all this research, and you give me, my ADHD brain too, all the these snippets that are interesting to me. And then dive into the tools and tactics that we can actually use, which is what I think that's so interesting, that you never sat in a therapist office, because I had, and then I had been in therapy for years, and then I met with a coach once, and it was this moment of, and I was meeting with a certain kind of therapists, clearly, because then this coach did what I see you doing on podcasts, and of this giving action steps for well, how does this show up in your every day? And that's how I chose to sort of abandon my track to become a therapist. And I was like, I'm going to become a coach.
Well, it's funny. I just told somebody today, and I feel like I could get banned out of my profession for what I'm about to say next. But a lot of times therapists, we turn our nose up a little bit to the coaches, because we got our masters, we've done our 3,000 hours of internship, and we've sat for our licensure. And so we know everything. And then I feel like the coaching, in creating my magnetic marriage course, I worked with a coach, Preston Pugmire, and I swear we fought for almost a year. I mean, as much as I know how to fight, but where I'm saying, no, here's these therapy things I want to talk about. And he's saying people need steps, they need action, they need things to do. And then I'm already going into the right, but then they don't do them. I mean, have you ever, and then I'm there to pick up the piece of like, well, let's figure out why. And so then I feel like we finally came to this nice balance where, okay, I get to talk about all the things that lead us to feel the way we do. Then we give these action steps, and then I will throw a little bit of, hey, and if you didn't do that, here's probably why. And so I've actually put more of the coaching, kind of some of these coaching aspects in my practice as well. And it's been really exciting, but I also kind of almost say I have an alter ego. Man, this is almost embarrassing. I feel too comfortable with you, Susie, but I feel like I almost have this alter ego. I jokingly call Toby the life coach, so I'm like, do you want Tony, the therapist, or do we got to get Toby in here to come in and tell you what to
perfect.
do? Right. And then
wearing either hat.
Exactly. And then Tony will come in and then say, and tell me more why you didn't do that. Like, let's figure that out. Yeah.
So this is just a perfect segue. Thank you very much into what I want to talk about, because there is this both and, like, it doesn't have to be this is right and that is wrong. No. And it can be a little bit of everything, which is not a message I was raised with. It was very much, a right or a wrong, which gets us into some of your work on codependency and affective dependency and differentiation. Could you speak a little to that?
So, and please, you can wave your hand if all of a sudden I'm frothing at the mouth and I've been on for 15 minutes. Okay. So, I mean, I really do feel like we absolutely we just don't have the tools that we need to be the best version of ourselves in relationships from the factory. And we just don't, because we come into relationships with our attachment wounds and our abandonment wounds. And we're so afraid that if somebody really knows how we feel or think about something, that they'll leave. So I feel like we go into these relationships with people kind of trying to feel each other out about, well, what do you think? I don't know. What do you think? And often we won't really even know our true selves, or we're going to put out a version of ourselves that isn't exactly who we really are. But we also don't want to go all in, because this person might not like that version of me and they may leave. And then as we then get in relationships and now we start going through life and things happen, now all of a sudden we really realize, oh, I have a different experience, or I have a different opinion. And now I don't even have the tools of how to express it. So then when I try to express that I have a different opinion, and that doesn't go well, then I feel like, well, that doesn't feel very safe. And then we just start almost growing apart, because we just don't know what we don't know, and we don't have the tools of how to communicate. So I often say, and I got to do this with my hands here, but so we get into relationships and we're codependent and we're enmeshed because we feel like, well, that's what we're supposed to be. And then as we go through life and have these different experiences, we start to grow toward interdependence. But then it's scary, because all of a sudden we realize we have these different experiences. And if it doesn't go well when I try to talk about it, if the other person says things like, I didn't know that. I mean, how do you think I feel about that? Now we're so afraid we go back into enmeshment and codependency. And so differentiation is where one person ends and the other begins. So even when I can get a couple that will start to be able to express that they are two different individuals, and now they are having two different experiences, when people become differentiated, I always say right down the middle is a ton of invalidation, and that's scary. So even when we're trying to, so we didn't have the tools, so we don't know what we don't know. Then when we have to actually go through some difficult times to even try to go find the tools, then we got to hope we found the right tools. And then when we try to put them into place, then all of these fears come up. And so it's a fair amount of work. But man, when done correctly, or when both people are open to this, and I think that's a big challenge, right? Then what it feels like to be two interdependent, differentiated individuals that have their own experiences, and now we're not afraid to express them. That I feel like that's a version of a relationship that I don't think any of us saw modeled. I don't think that was the case. So now we're kind of jumping out into the dark or the blind, and then it's scary because it feels not right. Because we're worried this person will leave, but then all of a sudden we find out that, oh, it's okay for me to be me and them to be them, and now we actually can communicate with curiosity and anyway, so there's kind of I could go 2 hours into each conversation around that, but I feel like that's right. But I think that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I mean, that is my experience growing up, just this looking externally for validation and
Yeah.
needing that, like, oh, okay, Susie, you know, like what, like not just learning that I didn't know what was right. I needed to look externally for what was right.
Yeah.
And then just so interestingly and obviously that led me into choosing my first husband, and you know some of the
Right.
because that's what I was used to, and that's what it's like,
Absolutely.
of course I'm going to look to him to see. I mean, even if I was something just came up the other night. I'm now married a second time, and in this marriage
Mhm.
came up with tacos, and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember just have I was a stay-at-home mom, and I made tacos one night, and I got quote unquote in trouble because I did
Oh,
it the wrong way, and had such fear and angst, and probably didn't serve my poor kids. I certainly didn't serve them soft tacos for like 5 years. You can ask.
oh,
They just
yeah.
got, and yet so interesting because it was that like, you know, it wasn't that there was this conscious like, okay, that's his way of doing things, and that might be his way of doing things,
Right.
but Susie's way might be okay too. It was this like shame wound,
Oh.
total wounding in that like, oh no, must do tacos now, hard shell in this way. Um,
And that's a great, I love that kind of an example because boy, if anybody listening that hasn't been in that kind of relationship will say, well, you just make the tacos you want to make. And it's, oh, please, you don't even know what that's
I
like.
would love
Um,
to.
Oh, exactly. And so, you know, what's funny too, Susie, and part of what I love about this is I just had an episode a couple of weeks ago where I talked about a concept called nonviolent communication. And it's something I was not aware of. And now it's this hyperfixation, but it's in essence, if we look at violence, you know, communication is violent if it's somebody that is in essence trying to coerce somebody into being somebody that they're not, or if they are trying to get somebody to do something uh, because it makes, you know, me feel better. And the first rule in this nonviolent communication is separating an observation from a judgment. And when I really dug into that, so the observation is you know, you made soft tacos, and then the judgment comes in to manage my anxiety. So it's like, well, you obviously made them because you don't know that hard tacos are better. I mean, you know, so, and that's
Right.
where it's like, no, the observation is I made soft tacos, period. And then if we can separate the judgment, but that judgment is there for that person. And it's so sad if you look at it that way of, so if growing up, you know, they got validation because they made hard tacos, or their dad said soft tacos are for wimps or whatever it is. Now all of a sudden they're like, well, you obviously don't know that hard tacos are better because it's managing their anxiety. And so then you're not allowed to have that space. So the reason that it's considered violent communication is you start that conversation having to defend something that you didn't even know. Why am I defending this? It's, we can have two different opinions, but
Yeah,
not to that person who's already created this entire narrative to make themselves feel better. Which,
better.
isn't that
Yeah.
wild? Yeah.
It's so much of it is so wild and crazy, and you know, I just, your work helps me so much just sort of lift myself up, and when I'm feeling sometimes like it's just all too much.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you know, I can see how, you know, like now here I am 51 in like a loving relationship, and really I'm, you know, I've done the work, I'm reading the books and all of that, and still will get a really scared, triggered response that has nothing to do with my current husband's, what he's doing. It is just so
No.
me in my head. But because of, and this is why I love your work, showing that, you know, attachment wounds and how we were modeled as kids in those foundational relationships
Yeah.
still is going to show up in our relationships. And that, you know, learning, I'd like for you to talk about your
Hmm.
rules for constructive communication, because
Yeah.
learning how to do that has been instrumental for me. So while my nervous system is reacting, it's just sort of this, you know, messaging of my, like giving myself something concrete to follow. And also this like, Susie, you've done nothing wrong. You're making soft tacos, or
Absolutely. You've done that.
you're asking
Exactly.
for
Right.
your needs, or you're, you know, yes,
Yeah. Okay. So can I go on a bit of a tangent, but it'll be a
sure.
good one?
I love
Okay.
tangents.
Okay. Okay. So so where I kind of even start with that is over on my Waking Up to Narcissism podcast, I was talking about this concept called the amygdala hijack a few weeks ago. And I feel like the reason I want to start there is because often I love what you're saying about we get triggered and we don't even realize what the trigger was. And our amygdala, which is our fight or flight part of our brain is so just sitting at the surface when we've been in emotionally unhealthy, abusive relationships, because we don't even know. It might be tacos. It might be where I left I don't know, a plant. I don't know, whatever we leave around, the shoes. And so then if all of a sudden I'm on high alert that this might not go well, over time, the neurons that fire together, wire together. And so then all of a sudden what it feels like to be me is on high alert. And then if I just have the slightest criticism, I go right into full blown fight or flight mode. And then that's where then people start to, they aren't themselves. They may get angry or emotional or sad. And then they feel like, man, what is wrong with me? I can't even stay in this conversation. But your body is keeping the score, is the book, that I so love about trauma. And so your body's trying to tell you this isn't safe. And so when that amygdala is hijacked, it's unfortunate, but there's really not much you can do in that moment, because these emotions are traveling a couple of times faster than your logic there to protect you. And so I feel like that amygdala hijack can happen so quickly when somebody's been in an unhealthy relationship, that then when we're in a healthier space, it's still going to occur. But now we have this opportunity to talk about tacos with our new partner and say, oh, check that out. When you said that, this is what triggered me. And if that person's going to say, tell me more about that, there are so many things happening in a cool way there. Part of the reason why talk therapy does work is I'm expressing something that's scary, and the other person is showing me concern and saying, tell me more, and not judging me about that.
Yeah.
And so then, right. So over time, then it will feel safe to be able to express scary things, because I have another human being there to process emotion. And so that's, I feel like, how ultimately, when you are in a healthy relationship, how we can just become the best versions of ourselves, because we bring these scary things from, whether it's childhood, adolescence, unhealthy relationships. And if we just keep them in our heads, they don't resolve themselves into, and we lived happily ever after in our head. They get scarier and scarier. So we have to have a way to express that. So
to practice it. I really appreciate that. Yeah. I just want to circle around to any listeners that, because we're using healthy and unhealthy, like healthy, like if they had unhealthy relationships. And I'm currently rereading this great book called Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And I just sit here and I'm like, didn't everyone have, we didn't even know emotional intelligence existed if we're a certain age. So for so many of us, I think some people get, really sort of pedantic about well, I didn't have an unhealthy relationship, and then can't hear what we're saying. And I'm just like, if our emotions, if there was not space for us to have feelings, and our feelings were not sort of validated and held, and that we might have these triggers now too. So they didn't need sort of a narcissistic, quote unquote. I know that you do a lot of work with this, with the emotionally.
No, Susie, I'm grateful you say that, because a lot of times, even when I talk about every kid is going to have attachment and abandonment wounds.
Right. You can't get through childhood without wounds.
You can't. And so sometimes right. And I like to give this such a silly example of this, but every little kid by definition is a little egotistical, theoretical narcissist, because all they know is their reality, and they don't have empathy for others around them yet, or, and especially if it's not modeled. And I like giving the example of, if a kid says, I want a pony for my birthday, and you live in an apartment building, I mean, you're not getting a pony, but the little kid doesn't say, oh my gosh, that must be because of we live in an apartment. They say, I asked for a pony, you didn't give it to me, you must not love me. I must be broken. And so, or I've done
that's a great example. It's like, well,
right. Yeah. And so then all of a sudden, you get into adolescence, and you drive by a farm, you see a horse, you're like, my parents hate me. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? And so that's where I feel like it's so wild to see the way that we hang on to that. And then I think another example is that even when, and I've been doing a little more with this around my 4 pillars, which I know we'll kind of get to, but one of my pillars is I can't tell somebody that they're wrong, or I disagree, or I feel like what they're saying is ridiculous, even if I think that is the case. And I feel like one of the ways that we do this, and as even the best of parent, is if a kid says, hey, I'm scared about this math test, and if we say, hey, bud, there's nothing to worry about, you can do hard things, what we're really telling them is, hey, bud, your feelings don't matter, and they're wrong, And so, I mean, I just sounded like I was the world's greatest dad, but the kid just hears, I guess I'm not going to express my emotions anymore, so they're not valid.
Yes,
so
I mean, that's such a great
yeah,
example, because that's what our parents would do, like, oh no, you're good, like pep talk,
totally.
versus the kid is learning, you saying you're not scared. He's like, but I am scared.
Yeah, but
And
apparently
that's,
now I
yeah,
can't express that, so I have to stuff
right.
my emotion of fear.
Yeah.
So no, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do work so much around the, kind of the big ticket items of narcissism, emotional immaturity, but even the best of parent can then, by bless their heart, doing their best.
Right. It's
But
not
then,
about faulting our
yeah,
parents. I'm not faulting, I do think back to one of your pillars is that like everyone is doing the best they can. Like, I
they
don't
are.
think there's a parent out there that's like, I'm going to screw up my kid. No pony for you. It's
Yeah, well,
like-
okay, and again, here's maybe exclusive number two. But I remember early on in my therapy career, there was a part of me that was starting to, because before I really knew what I knew as a therapist, that when a parent would come in and they would say, no, I know I should be spending more time with my kid, but I don't. I end up on my phone or playing video games. I used to feel like, there you go. See, that they know they're not doing their best. But then you dig in a little bit more and you find out that then, oh, because they feel like they are unworthy as a parent, or they feel like they don't know what to do. They feel guilt and shame around it. They feel like, their parent was so manipulative or controlling that now they feel like, I don't even know how to parent. So then
Yeah.
I had to
It's like the
retract that and
softer
go,
emotions.
totally
Yeah.
right. So then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, all right, I'll go back to, oh man, they're trying their best, and especially
Yeah.
because they're in therapy looking for help.
Right. They're
Yeah, and then
clearly
I had to
right.
realize that part.
Yeah. No, it's super helpful. And so can we go into the rules of constructive communication, because they
Yeah.
are super helpful, I thought.
Well, okay, so
Um,
it's funny too when you're saying that, Susie. So so if I kind of give you the origin story or the evolution of my 4 pillars of a connected conversation. So I started, and I'll make this so fast, but I never was going to do couples therapy. I started working, and I was working with guys, and I was working with addiction, and especially people that were using pornography as a coping mechanism, and this was a long time ago. So we were still saying things like, oh, just sing a hymn or do some push-ups or that sort of thing. And the behavioral part really wasn't addressing the issue. And so then I kind of start looking at it like, okay, why do people turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms? And it's when they don't feel connected. I call them these 5 voids: when they don't feel connected in their marriage, their parenting, their faith, their health, or their career. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to go figure out ways to address each one of these with a solid evidence-based therapeutic model. And so then I found for couples, it's called a emotionally focused therapy, EFT, started by this amazing woman named Sue Johnson. And so then in that world, they talk a lot about attachment, kind of what we've been talking about. And she uses a term called emotional bids. And so early on in my practice, and even in my early podcasts, I would talk about EFT all the time, emotionally focused therapy. And I would talk about when you're expressing something, you're holding your heart in your hand and you're offering it as an emotional bid. And if that partner takes that emotional bid and then they don't value it, it's like they're taking your heart and crumbling up and stomping on the ground. And so I didn't have pillars. I just talked about EFT. And then one of the first things I did was I came up with, because I wanted some cool word, was ROC, rules of constructive communication. And so those were almost like the beginning of getting to my 4 pillars.
Okay.
So and so what those were, and it's funny because I don't go back to those often enough, but those were when we're feeling like we're disconnected in our relationship, that it really is, if an argument's happening, that I think my first one was acknowledge that awareness, acknowledge that this isn't helping, this isn't going well.
Right.
And
We
then
are
from there,
arguing.
we are arguing, right?
Right.
And so nothing's wrong with me. And so that's, being aware, giving it a voice. And then I would kind of go from there to, okay, I need to be able to acknowledge that when I get into my amygdala, that this is not going to go well. So if I'm aware it isn't going well, I'm going to call a timeout, and I'm going to step away. I'm going to give my brain time to calm, let the cortisol go away and reset. And then, let's breathe. And I know you're a big mindfulness and meditation person, which I love. And so, that literally is the in through the nose. I mean, I just sat up straighter when I even talked about it, but it's the in through the nose, out through the mouth, lowers the heart rate, lowers the cortisol, gets me out of my amygdala, lets me tap into my frontal lobe so I can actually process things in a more mature way. And then, and now the next part was, okay, now I can go back and try to understand where my partner's coming from with empathy. And so, and I thought, oh, I think I've kind of got this thing figured out. But then the next part was, and now talk. But then people would say, okay, now what? the
Yeah.
talking. So then that, right. So then that
Yeah.
led to these 4 pillars of a connected conversation. And I really feel I'm going to stand in my healthy ego and say, these are tried and tested with about 1,300 couples over a long period of time. And so I really feel like, so that's my runway there to say that these are based off of emotionally focused therapy. They're evidence-based tools. And as I lay these out, I want your listeners to think of when a conversation has gone south or it hasn't gone well, of which one of these pillars most likely you or your spouse have broken. And then that's what will cause people to go out in the weeds in a conversation. So my first pillar is assuming good intentions, that nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, oh, I can't wait till my spouse gets home and then I'm going to tell them that they are never there for me. And, that'll be amazing. Nobody does. So assuming good intentions means if somebody is withdrawn or if somebody's coming to me with some emotion or that sort of thing, if I start by saying, okay, they're not trying to hurt me. Now, the more I work around narcissism and extreme emotional immaturity, I did throw kind of a 1B there, which was, so assuming good intentions, or there's a reason why somebody does the things they do. Because if somebody's showing up in a relationship and they are emotionally dysregulated and they are angry and they're mean and they're cursing, I'm not asking somebody to say, oh, they're not trying to hurt me.
Right.
I mean, because now we're back to that, my own brain saying, oh, they are. I mean, but I can say, man, there's a reason why they feel like they have to express themselves that way, probably because they were, raised without a healthy model of communication or a relationship.
Yeah.
So that pillar 1, assuming good intentions. And the whole goal is to keep us in the conversation. So if I start by saying, I think that they are very mean, then I'm already kind of 1 foot out of the conversation. So then that leads the second pillar.
Well, I just want to pause right there, because that is something that is so huge. And I call my listeners warriors. And like, if we can get to that, that's why I like your sort of rules of connected communication, because that first, the awareness of like, I'm triggered, I'm irritable, or like, oh, wow, here goes our pattern. Like this, it looks like I asked for, and now so that awareness. And then the next part of doing something to calm it down. So the timeout is something that my husband and I absolutely do. And you go into more depth on that in podcast, but I like
Susie,
that. Those parts as being so necessary, really, for me to be in an open brain space to then get into your pillar of assume good intentions. Because otherwise I'm like this little,
here's what I dig about this so much is that, I'm so used to now just going full bore 4 pillars that I really like that you are reminding me that there probably are some pre-pillars, which would be these rules of constructive conversation, to be able to get yourself in the mind space. So now, other than anybody listening to this episode, I'm going to now start talking about that I've always remained talking about my rules of constructive communication, but I really haven't been. So thank you for bringing that up.
I think of your pillars as like, once my husband and I are calm and like we've done the timeout or whatever we need to do sort of individually, and we come back with this intention of like, okay, what's going on here? That's when yours are magical. They give me that framework to be like, okay,
no, I love this because I want to say is I want my emotional immaturity to kick in and say, and that's exactly what I was hoping you would say. But it's like, oh man, no, that's brilliant of what I said back in the day. I need to put that together with the things now. So that's awesome. So so
I feel that's some of the ADD brain. I'm like, I said.
I do. I mean, I absolutely do, which is ironic to anybody watching. I'm literally holding my virtual couch squishy brain.
I love it. I need one of those. Yeah.
So you do. And so then, all right. So then we're in that good mind space. We can assume good intentions, or there's a reason why somebody's saying what they can say, why they're saying or showing up the way they are. And then we move into pillar 2, which is more of this mindset, which is I can't put off the energy, the vibe, or I literally can't say, I don't believe you. That's ridiculous. Even if, and I feel like people hear that right there and then they hear nothing else I say, because people will often say to me, I mean, I know I can't say that. I know I can't disagree with them. And I say, no, that's not the point. We're trying to keep the conversation going. So the mindset is I can't say, are you kidding me? Or that's ridiculous. Or I didn't say that. That's one of the biggest ones. Even if I think, are you kidding me? Or if I think that's ridiculous, or even if I'm pretty certain I did not say that. Because and I feel like that pillar 2 is a tough one, because if I'm going to assume good intentions and then the person says, man, I had a really interesting one. here's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it'll give a really simple but powerful example of this. There's somebody that I've been seeing for a long time, and she's an older lady and she's adorable. And she said recently, she's like, well, you know how that time where you told me that you didn't like my hair? And that's one where if there is anything that I know I have never said in my entire life as a guy who was bald at the age of 19, and now I'm almost 53, I literally have never said anything about anyone's hair other than I wish I had that. And I'm not even being joking. I mean,
You're
so
like,
when this
I
lady,
know 100%.
yeah. And so I had to use my own pillars, and I wanted, so I had to assume good intentions. She's not trying to hurt me. Or there's a reason why she's saying that. And then, I wanted to then break my own pillars and say, okay, all right, hold on. I've never said that. But then, because if I would have, now all of a sudden, now the conversation is going to go into the tit for tat. Well, yeah, you did. Well, no, I didn't. And so I had to go, oh, okay, because here's what's cool about this, Susie, is then we get into pillar 3, which now is questions before comments. So my questions then started to say, okay, man, I had to really be present with that one. And I had to say, she's like, you know how you told me you didn't like my hair and all this stuff. And, she's like, that really hurt my feelings. And so then I was saying, man, tell me more about that. Like, what do you remember about that situation? Questions. But, and then she's like, oh, we were talking about this or this. And then I was saying, oh, wow, man, thank you so much for sharing that. Questions before comments. Because then I was saying, because I appreciate that. That helps me understand more. And I can, man, that's where empathy kicks in, and that would be really hard if you feel like I told you that I didn't like your hair. And I am so grateful that you shared that with me. Pillar 4 is staying present or leaning in, because I could have then, what I often tell people is that pillar 4 really is exemplified by, or the breaking of it is when people then run into their bunker or they take a victim stance. So if I would have just said at that point, I could have held all 3 pillars, and then that 4th one, I could have said, man, that's really hard, but okay, I guess my opinion doesn't matter, and I'm just a big piece of garbage, because now I want, right? I want her to then rescue me and say, oh no, I shouldn't have brought it up. Like, you know what, you're right, you're good. Or so if I just stay present and to say, thank you so much for sharing that. Now that person in this scenario, she feels heard. And I feel like so often, and I do say, I want us to start from a place of, to be heard is to be healed, or our brain so craves resolution that we feel like every back and forth we have needs to have resolution. But I feel like if you get into this pattern of we have to end a conversation with resolution, ultimately, typically the pathologically kind or maybe highly sensitive person is going to eventually just say, okay, I know where this is going to go. So I'm just going to say, you know what? You're right. Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then that person leaves, the other person leaves thinking, okay, good, great talk, but the kind or highly sensitive person says, okay, my opinion doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
I am so glad you just said that, this back and forth looking for a resolution, because one of the things that comes up for me with, I am not sure if it's ADD or if it is narcissistic abuse. It is when I am trying to be in this pillar 2 or pillar 3 of, first of all, assuming good intentions and listening and questions before comments. My brain is trying so hard to hold on to defending Susie. It's like this place of but wait, and because at the end of my old conversations, there would be resolution, and which would 99% be Susie's wrong and there's some consequence. And I would fold and self-abandon, like you're saying, and oh, it's okay, right, you're right, you're right, I did say that about your hair.
Well, and Susie, I think you literally just answered it in such a cool way without even knowing it, but where it's like, man, why do I do that? Is my ADD? Is it the narcissistic abuse? But it's because I need to get my point in now, or it will never matter. Now, realizing in hindsight that it didn't matter, because to somebody that's narcissistic or emotionally abusive, they are not having the conversation. But that's where I feel like it takes a lot of presence to be able to sit and I always talk about being aware. I'm aware that my thought is saying, are you kidding me? Absolutely. And emotional immaturity, which I take ownership of myself at times, is, oh my gosh, that person just said that, I have to defend my ego. Because, and I think what happens is, talk about still bringing our childhood stuff into it, is that if we really look at shame, we really do have this default setting of shame, and again, guilt is like, oh, I did a bad, right? We all do. And I feel like guilt is that I did something bad. Shame is like, I'm a bad person. And go back to this. I know this sounds silly, but go back to that pony example when we're a kid. And so again, we are thinking with a 5-6-year-old brain. And so when we don't get what we need, then our default is I must be a bad kid, or else they would give me what I'm asking for. And so then shame is a default. So when somebody then questions us or says, I don't believe you, or you did this or whatever, our impulsive reaction is to go, they think I'm a bad husband. They think I'm a bad father. So I need to put a timeout to these 4 pillars, and I just need to defend my ego right now. And when you're talking to somebody that's emotionally mature, that's actually the worst thing we can do, because now we're going to go, wrestle in the mud, and we're never going to, right. We're never going to get anywhere. So what I think is so interesting is that, so let's say that then I heard this lady and now she feels heard and understood. In an emotionally mature conversation, it's easier to then not defend my ego if I know that now I am now going to be heard. So when I'm really working with a couple, the 4 pillars, I sometimes call it one round or one scene of where, okay, so now she felt heard and understood. And now it's funny as I give this example, because she was not there to 4 pillar, but had she been, then I'm saying, I'm thank you so much. And then I now become the speaker. She's the listener. And now she must assume good intentions. She can't tell me that's ridiculous. And she can ask questions, and she needs to stay positive. Now, again, the next part of this is all hypothetical, because then then I would have said, thank you so much for sharing that. Man, I am so sorry, because that now I can understand if you feel like I said that, then that would really be hurtful, because she feels validated. But now I was able to not have to defend my ego, knowing that I was going to get turned. Now I get to say, and now I always say, when you're now up, you stay in your I feels and I wonder and I worry statements, not but what you don't understand is, because I wanted to say stuff like, well, but what you don't understand is that I, as bald at 19, but I said, man, I so appreciate that. I feel like one of my core, I feel like I love humor, but I also am very aware that I know I don't use the self-deprecating humor, because I feel like as a bald kid at 19, I got plenty of that. So that's really hard for me. And I'll go back and then say, but man, if that's what you heard, I absolutely understand why you would feel that way.
Yeah.
And because that is, I don't want to be dramatic and say that's the only way, but part of the 4 pillars is a chance to have people take ownership or accountability. Because if she now can trust me, because I'm she can trust that we're going to have these emotionally mature conversations, then I feel like she would be able to say, oh, wow, okay, I can feel your energy or your truth. And so, honestly, I don't remember those words coming from your mouth. So actually, I appreciate you sharing that, that kind of thing.
It's such a more open way of conversing. And I want to circle on 2 things where you said, sort of the 5 to 6-year-old brain of reactivity and needing to defend. Like, when that absolutely is sort of what's there for me when I'm having that, like, oh my God, but I need to say this. And it is because I am in that. This is why I love your work of bringing the EFT work of bringing the attachment from youth and those original relationships into the attachment now, because I literally am like, oh my God, he's going to leave me, even though whatever we're talking about.
Absolutely.
And if I'm in my 51-year-old brain, I'm very much like, no, he's not, he's fine, but I am so in that reactive defensive place. And I guess just to give listeners something that helps me, that's from your work, is this. I try to stay in this seeking to understand rather than be understood. That's something that I feel is in your pillars of this. Like, when I'm asking questions, I'm like, okay, it is my turn to I'm trying to understand him, and trying to get out of that 5 to 6-year-old brain.
What's so good about that is, so pillar 3 actually was seek first to understand before being understood. And I know we could talk for another hour, but I got to tell the story, because this one is a self-deprecating humor. When I was really starting to put those pillars into place, I would say that seek first to understand before being understood. And over time, I was like, man, where is that? That is somewhere in the Bible. And I was like, okay. And then eventually I was like, I need to look that up. And then at some point I said, probably Paul. So I remember a couple of times saying, and like Paul says in the Bible, seek first to understand. And then I thought, you know what, let me find the verse so I can sound really smart. And I Google it, and it's Steve Covey. Like, it's not in the Bible.
Good old Steve.
That was one of the most embarrassing. I still remember The Couple. That was a long time ago. And then I just thought, man,
You're like the Bible.
So then I realized, so then I realized, I don't have to pay some royalties. So then I was like, or how about we say questions before comments, instead of seek first understanding. So there's my truth right there.
I love it.
But I like what you're saying though, because one of the, I mean, the real but sad example when I speak about that, sometimes I want to give the, the one that can really hammer the point home, but I'd had a couple that had communicated well about, doing some things in the home, responsibilities and stuff. And a husband came home and the house was a mess and the wife was on her phone. And we'd had talks about, oh, she turns to her phone for unhealthy coping mechanisms or whatever. And so he came in and just got really angry. And this is so true. And I wish it wasn't a true story. But then she then said, well, one of my childhood friends passed away. And so I've been looking on my phone for pictures for this memorial. So had he come in and sought first to understand or ask questions first, right, then none of that would have happened. If he would have said, assuming good intentions, because the place is a mess, and then that mindset of whatever she's going to say, I'm not going to say, are you kidding me? Then I'm going to lean into pillar 3 and say, hey, tell me about your day. So tell me what's going on. And if she would have said, this person passed away, oh my gosh, what an opportunity to be there instead of him coming in and saying, really? Like,
he won't care about the mess. It's like the mess disappears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
well,
curiosity is so important.
Could you run us through, you gave an example of, again, a sort of a heteronormative example, but it works for many of you gave an example in one of your podcasts of a man coming home. Maybe a consistent argument, which many people have, is around finances. And he came home and he saw all these bags in the house. And could you give an example of how the 4 pillars could work there or how they wouldn't work there? Yeah.
Well, there's so many, I mean, it's funny because I sometimes don't even know, because a lot of times I'm given those and it's something that maybe just happened in a session. And so I don't know if this is exactly that one, but so somebody coming home and there's, the money is spent everywhere. And then, I mean,
like he has the idea money spent, and then he comes in and he sees all these bags and
and he's already made the judgments of, okay, I'm just a walking paycheck. Nobody cares about me. So he's going in already, not assuming good intentions,
fired up,
and so, right. And so in a perfect world, it would be, okay, I'm going to assume that there's a reason and man, what an opportunity for me to connect with my spouse. And then already the mindset of whatever she says, I'm not going to say, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. And I go questions first before comments. So, hey, tell me more. Tell me what's been going on today. And it's so funny, Susie. Honestly, I don't remember that exact one.
No, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's what, because listeners would be able to resonate with that. And so I guess my question is, because I do well, Tony, with the first 3, but the 4th, I don't necessarily go into victimy, but I think I move too quickly into then like this emotional immaturity of me trying to defend myself. So if there's an example of, someone comes home and there are all these bags there and he's assuming good intentions and he's, thinking like, okay, like, and asks questions. And she's like, okay, well, I got shoes for the kids for soccer and Susie was out of her pants and this and that. And yet he still is having that question in his head. Like he's thinking like, okay, I see that she thinks that these were good expenses, but in the, like, how do you move forward into that?
No, it's so good.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it's interesting. And this is actually perfect segue for, I feel like the 4 pillars, as I did more couples therapy, it either then helped people understand a framework to communicate effectively, or it almost exposed more of the emotional immaturity. So I feel like now in the example you're giving,
doing both for me.
And so I feel like in that example now, I want him to be able to then say, okay, that's her experience. I can't tell her she's wrong. I just ask questions. And then I stay present, because now if we're emotionally mature and I maybe still think, okay, I don't think that was a good purchase. Then if I say, okay, you know what, I appreciate that. And I understand they need shoes. But I feel like sometimes we spend money here and I feel like sometimes we spend money here. And I feel like, at times maybe we've said, let's get on the same page. And I feel like, you run things by me and sometimes you don't. And if she's doing all right, I'm going to assume good intentions. I'm not going to tell him he's wrong. But now I can lock into a real example of this, where then the wife on that scenario. So we did a round and then she said, okay, oh, I absolutely hear you. And I can understand that. And she said, but I feel like when I have asked about these things in the past, that then it doesn't matter. There are sometimes you say yes, sometimes you say no. And I know that the kids needed these things. So to be honest, I was willing to deal with the ramifications or the repercussions, and in that moment, I feel like we had this moment where he was either going to say, man, you're right, I can be pretty inconsistent, or he was going to say, oh, wow, I guess you think I'm the world's worst husband. And in that one, that was, and that's a perfect example of, if we can stay in the framework, that now he had to do a little bit of self confrontation.
Yeah. I mean, that right there is the exact example of like, oh, I see. Sometimes I've been inconsistent. Is that emotional maturity versus, oh, you're thinking that's really helpful. And the presence, I think when I think of the fourth pillar as presence, and like, and my responsibility to just really settle my own like 5 to 6 year old brain, whatever triggers are coming up for me, breathing, assuming good intentions. It's almost like all the pillars get enmeshed into one.
Well, they are. And so then I feel like the thing that we don't know as well is that if we have a consistent framework to communicate, and that's where I feel like EFT or these my 4 pillars are so important, because ultimately, if we can get out of that emotional immature dance that we all, I feel like, go into relationships with because we didn't know what we didn't know,
right?
That really, when Sue Johnson talks about we're designed to deal with emotion in concert with another human, then it is amazing when I can go to my spouse and say, hey, let me take you on my train of thought. Here's what I was thinking. And if I know they're going to say, oh my gosh, tell me more, even if it sounds offensive or that sort of thing, because ultimately, we still are seeking external validation, because that's what we bring forth from childhood. Every kid, they get their sense of self through external validation. And then we get into this relationships, emotionally immature. But then when we can start to really recognize in a relationship that we are 2 autonomous beings, and I know I'm kind of now going so just out there, but then once I now am able to express something and it's safe and that person shares what their experience is, we then start to realize, and this is like 10 levels deep of emotional maturity, of that I put out a version of myself, and that's what I want people to validate. But what if that version I'm putting out there is not the version that people are experiencing? And now my spouse, my partner, the one that knows me the best, is the one that is going to be able to communicate that to me. And now I have this opportunity to really to self-confront. And that is where some incredible growth. And I will tell you, I know we're almost out of time, but this is where, as I was doing this myself in my relationship, where I still remember to this day, my wife at one point expressing that sometimes when I come in and I'm throwing out cash, making it rain or whatever, and other times I'm saying, man, we need to cut down on our spending. And that is me and my emotional immaturity. And that some days I want validation that, hey, everybody like me, I've got money. And other days I want people to stop because it makes me uncomfortable because we're spending. And so I had to then self-reflect. And at first I thought, I don't do that. But then it's like, oh, I totally do that. And so now, now I'm so much more aware. And so I needed that person that could, I know it sounds dramatic to say, call me out, but to validate me and say, man, I hear you, but then say, but man, here's my experience. I feel like sometimes you do this and this. And if I had to sit in my own framework and say, she's not trying to hurt me, and I can't say, are you kidding me? And then I said, tell me more, give me examples. And then I had to stay present and not go into victim mode and say, okay, I guess I'll just go earn more. I'll just own a paycheck. And then I will never forget that. What an opportunity for growth.
Yeah. And it has to come from, I mean, that's why your rules of communication and the 4 pillars come together, because it has to come from a calm, open place. For me, when I can, I do that sort of when journaling, like I'll leave and then dump my thoughts on paper and figure out what the thoughts are, and whenever I'm like, my husband's name is Paul, and I'm like, it's Paul's fault, or Paul did this, and I'm like, okay, let's just sit with that a little and see what Susie might, and it's that self-confrontation that feels physically uncomfortable, and yet at the other side of that is where all the fun is. And so I really appreciate your time today. And I just want to mention to listeners, I will have all the links for your podcast and your work and website. And you have so many places for listeners to go. Your Instagram is funny. And just with the message to listeners that if anything sort of struck a bell today, to just dig deeper there. We really talked on a lot with emotional immaturity and mindfulness and communication, and I can't even go over it all.
No, I love it. And Susie, you and I'm getting your commitment now. You will come on my podcast.
Yeah, I would love to. I think that is great. Yes, I love
and then
helping people.
Okay, no, I love it. And I can't wait, because I feel like, man, we could probably touch on a lot of those different subjects, and I can't wait to hear more of your story, what we were talking about off camera as well. So I can't wait.
Yes. Yeah.
Before you say goodbye, I do want to take a picture as well. Okay.
Okay. Lovely.
Okay.
Yes.
You ready? Thank you. What a joy.
All
Susie,
right.
thank you very
Have
much.
a wonderful day. Thank you so much for shining this
Okay.
light out to the warriors and to me. Thank you for the work you do.
We will talk again soon. Okay,
Yay.
thank you.
Bye.